If your website is totally failing at turning visitors into buyers, one reason could be your terrible or non-existent calls to action. So in this video, I'm gonna give you 5 easy tips for better calls to action. Now, if you've never heard this term before, a call to action, or CTA, is a text or a button on your website that's there to get your user to take the next step. The definition is really in the name. It's calling on them to take an action. And here's why it's so important. On average, 50 to 70% of the traffic to your website will exit again in the first 10 seconds, meaning that the visitor will land on your site, make a judgment call, and leave again. So if you don't immediately convince them to stay just a little longer, they'll probably leave frustrated and you may never see that user ever again. No sale, no interest, and no way to reach them. But by simply adding a CTA in the right way, on the right spot to a website, I've seen clients increase conversion rates by as much as 83% month over month. So with that out of the way, let's jump into my 5 easy tips to improve your CTAs. Tip number 1 is placement. Your most important CTA will be above the fold. This just means the top of the first page the visitor sees when they come to your site. As to why they call it that, it's actually a throwback to newspapers. When you pick up a newspaper off the stand, you know what, actually, wait a second, hey, I'm gonna go get you a newspaper and I'll be right back. Okay, all right, I'm back. Newspaper, good, New York Times. The newspaper you get is always folded in half with the most important information on the top half of the front page. Every inch of the page is important, but the further down the page an article is, the less likely anybody will read it. So to get the most sales possible, newspapers made their most interesting content as visible as possible. In Italy, a crime of pasta? That sounds interesting. All right, you got it. The idea is exactly the same on your site. The most interesting information has to be at the top, and everything else needs to entice people to dive further into your offer. So by putting a CTA under the headline and subheader, you're providing a way for people to continue further into the page. The CTA under your headline is the most important one you have. It's clicked more than any other, and without it, you're guaranteeing people will leave the site more often. The second most important CTA is the one in the menu. Most modern websites have a sticky menu, or one that moves down the page with you. So by putting a CTA in the menu, you guarantee there will always be a way for your users to take the next step. Now, should that be the only CTA on the whole site? Definitely not. In fact, there should never be a spot on your website where some sort of call to action isn't visible. How you do this can sometimes come down to personal taste, but if you're worried about assaulting your users with CTAs all over the place, just remember the menu CTA is a great, always there option. Tip number 2 is clarity. Internet traffic is notoriously full of skeptical people. In fact, on an instinctive base level, visitors to a new site are looking for absolutely any reason to leave. Bad site design, poor writing, and even small things like your font choice can contribute to this. But one of the biggest reasons users leave a site is that they don't know what to do next. So your CTA needs to clearly lay out what the next action will be and how to take that action. Typically, this means you'll see the same structure over and over. It'll be some kind of text explaining what action to take, like sign up now for these incredible savings, which is then immediately followed by a button that says something like sign up now or get this deal. The pre-button text helps the reader understand where they would be going if they click the button. And then the text on the button itself provides a subtle bump to encourage the user just a bit more. By providing clearer guidance for CTAs, you're making it easier for users to see and understand the path on a more instinctive level, and you'll get more people digging deeper into your website. Tip number 3 is length. How long or short your CTA is will have a huge impact on its readability and ultimately your click-through rate. But whether it should be a full sentence or just a phrase depends mostly on where it is on the page. In my experience, the supporting text will do most of the job explaining the call to action, so the button just needs to provide the final push to get the user to take the next step. Now, some people prefer really long CTAs, sometimes full sentences like, yes, I want to become a master marketer, let's do it. But again, I think this is just too long. Remember, you have 10 seconds to capture someone's attention and keep them moving through your website. So making your CTA really long means they have more to read and increases the likelihood they'll leave instead of click through to the next step. Add to this that In some website editors, a long CTA button actually breaks onto a second line and looks really bad, and you've got a losing combination. The length of your CTA ultimately comes down to a bit of personal preference and a lot of testing, but in my experience, short button text and better supporting text is the way to go. Tip number 4 is split testing. If you've never heard of split testing before, the idea is that you try 2 different variations of the same web page against the same audience. So for instance, if you want to know whether the button Buy Now gets more clicks than the button Get in Touch, you would make 2 versions of the exact same homepage, the only difference being the button text, and half your visitors would be exposed to each one. Then you wait to see how users react. If they react more positively on the page with the Buy Now button, then you call that version the winner and send 100% of your traffic to that page from now on. Here's the trick with split testing though. You have to test one thing at a time. If you don't, you'll never be able to tell why one page variation worked over the other. For instance, let's say you change the header image and the main CTA button text, and you put up one variation with the old set and one variation with the new set. Once the changes start working, can you really say why? Was it the image or the button text? How do you really know? The answer is you don't know. But if you isolate the changes you make, it's easy to find winners between the 2 groups. Okay, so how do you actually implement a split test? We'll get into the details of split testing in later videos, but these are the nuts and bolts of it. If you're using a landing page builder like ClickFunnels or Lead Pages, then split testing functionality is already baked in. Just create a variation and follow the steps provided. That's it. If you've built your site from scratch or you're using a more complicated builder like WordPress, then I would suggest Google Optimize. I'll provide a link for this in the description, but basically it's an integration with your Google Analytics account that allows you to make on-the-fly variations to your page. Then it automatically filters users to one or the other of those variations, and you track the results directly in Google Optimize or via Analytics. Last thing I want to mention on split testing is that you have to give your tests time to work. The more data you have, the better, and less data might lead you to be more biased by the outcome. So the question then is how long? Well, that really depends on the numbers. What you need is statistical significance. This is the likelihood that a relationship between 2 or more variables is caused by something other than chance or luck. If you have 3 visitors to each variation, let's say, and 1 clicks the call to action on variation A, while 2 click it on variation B, you may have stats showing 33% more interest in variation B over variation A. But can you really say that that means thousands of other people will feel the same way? Probably not. On the other hand, with 5,000 total visitors to each variation, if your numbers are showing a 5% click-through with one CTA and 15% with the other, the number of total people who have taken part in the study have increased, and because there's more data, it's much more likely that visitors who weren't involved in the test will react in the same way as those who were. So we come to a more educated conclusion that one CTA will work better than the other, and thus the test has greater statistical significance. The minimum amount of time you should give for any test is 7 days, but I also wouldn't advise going past 3 months because you risk obsessing so much over what the data is that you don't end up taking any action on it. Tip number 5 is adaptation. This is an easy one. A CTA isn't static. It's intended to encourage people toward the next step on your website. So simply assuming you can use the same one over and over is foolhardy. The CTA you've written needs to match the information on the screen. You wouldn't use the same one on a sales page and a blog post. The writing style is different and the reason for people being on the page is different. So naturally, the way you coax them down the path needs to be different as well. If you're using the same CTA everywhere, you're either turning people off, confusing them, or at the very least, boring them to tears. So there you have it. Those are my 5 tips for better CTAs. Try these out. Let me know in the comments how it goes for you. And if you haven't yet, please hit that subscribe button to get more content like this. Hey, that was a good example of a call to action. All right, that's it for me. I'll catch you next time.